just so we know, all the you're basically speaking for the Principal Association
Superintendents, Vermont EA,
and
ESP.
And the folks on the ground.
Well, our organizations,
Yeah.
not every single member agrees with every single thing, but these are supported by our boards.
Yeah.
All right.
Our governance boards.
Okay, we're live. Welcome back to Senate Education, March 15, 242. Take a little more testimony on the study and again with our goal of moving this. And I think, let me just say this for everybody. Of course, there's always opportunity on the House side. Well, as there are certainly opportunities in other communities as it makes its way. You know this very, very, very well. You've been around, so.
Okay.
You know the stage that we're at.
Absolutely.
Okay, great.
So with that said, Jay Nichols, Vermont Principals Association, testifying on behalf of ESA, ESPA, BPA, Vermont, and EA. First of all, we'd like to reiterate that we think the critical message that the charge of the study committee should be is how to expand UPK to ensure best child outcomes, including all options for expansion and an implementation plan for girls in public schools. So secondly, and most importantly at this time, under the current circumstances, we think at the very least the committee should advocate for full FTE weight for students in preschool programs in public schools, where schools are now or will be providing full school day programming. We think this is a huge equity issue, and by not addressing this, I should stop and say we're trying to the version 2.1 because I had no chance to see 4.4. Oh, that's
Okay,
sorry.
Yeah, sure. It was just a little bit of what that just walked
Yeah,
through.
no, I listened
You
to
have
what
a
you
sense,
said.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we think it's a huge equity issue, and by not addressing that, we're providing a disservice to many of our poorer communities and school districts, and many of which don't have any viable options for out of school child care or educational services. This also doesn't impact the education fund, but does provide marginal relief for school districts that are already serving these students. We're often in economically depressed regions of our state, and we're often marginalized populations. I want to touch on that for a second. If your budget is $1 million and you're choosing to provide full day for your folks, your budget's still $1 million. The difference is you don't get to count those kids for the full rate that you should be able to count them, like you would a kindergarten kid or anybody else, any other kid. And the problem with that is it's the local taxpayers that are taking more of a hit on their tax rate as opposed to having to be spread to the education system the way that it should be and the way that it is for every other kid. So to us, this is a really big deal. We have schools right now, like the Winooski school districts and Outwood City, places like that are providing full day programs on their own dime. And those are some of our poorer communities. And at least in the case of Winooski, there are no private providers there to support them.
Mr. Nichols, with that, it seems to me as though that is a separate bucket of work.
Maybe.
Okay.
Because
So it's part of the original X56 conversation.
completely, yeah. And so, well, actually, I don't know, I'm not on that committee, but I would agree that the committee will definitely jump into this, and we will make a recommendation one way or the other to finance, and in the end, finance will be the ones that will determine, as you well know,
Appreciate that.
whether or not,
Yeah.
so definitely, yeah.
We're just asking for that support today.
No question.
We can
And
bring in
we
any
can
principals and superintendents as you.
Yeah, we can have Hayden make that a priority as soon as, not next week, but the week after. So
Yeah, I
we'll
just-
definitely.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm committed to doing that work. It just doesn't seem like it quite fits in with this particular carve out of S56, but yes, thank you
We're
for
fine
bringing
with
it up.
that. We just want to be in a position for the next school year where school districts are treated fairly based on what we believe is right for kids. So
And just
also,
so everybody knows, that decision usually be made by finance, anything around FTs at kind of the end game. So, yeah.
thank you. Okay. So given the aforementioned, we do believe that the study language is way too broad. However, you've already taken care of some of our concerns on that. We did hear the testimony from the Agency of Education, which pretty clearly indicated they don't have a lot of capacity to provide much technical support. From our position, if it takes longer to do a study and do it right, as long as the ADM issue is addressed, we're not wedded to having something done in 4 or 5 months. We think it's going to be a lot of work. We think that the conveyor of this, from our perspective, should be the Agency of Education convener. And more specifically, that the process be directed by the Universal Pre-Kindergarten Program or Agency of Education, because we presume this individual will already be the person that's working with early childhood in public education and in private, because of payments that go from there. I'm not 100% sure who that is right now. It used to be Wendy something. Do you know? No. Okay, sorry.
The only way to get Wendy Koenig.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not,
This is the person that, what's the position?
it's the Universal Pre-Kindergarten Program at the Agency of Education. It's not the person supposed to be in charge of this stuff, from my understanding. It'd be worth asking. Amy.
Yeah, yeah,
Just-
yeah,
We just
okay.
think that would
Yep.
make sense to have somebody like that.
Yeah,
And,
looking at the agency. I'm
yeah, if you want to look it up, I-
Dr. Crossman?
I can share. It's Kate Rogers, who was the
What's-
program
what's
manager
Kate?
just for the early teams. She just retired, so they're recruiting for that position.
Okay,
And Liz
Okay.
Case, who was the division director at the Agency of Education, has also just transitioned to the Agency of Human Services as the Child Development Division's policy director.
can't make this stuff up.
And they are actively recruiting for senior leadership in those positions.
thank you very much.
There's why I didn't know the name. There isn't a name right now.
Okay.
And again, this person, I was presuming would have a good understanding of the working dynamics between the private and public school, the early childhood programs, and how the payments work and all those things. In terms of the makeup of the committee, we strongly believe that at least 2 principals and/or early childhood teachers that already have programs in their schools serving full-day 4-year-olds be part of the committee, along with the litany described in version 2.1 of the testimony. However, I added to my testimony, I can send this to you after, Hayden. After listening to, or after quickly reviewing Building Bright Futures testimony, they talked about having a couple of representatives, and this is not shared with Jeff Bain and the company, but I think they'd be supportive. I think if we do that, it'd be really good if you could get members of the General Assembly to have a full-day program in your school and have private providers that are using, qualified teachers that are getting payments from the ed fund. So you can really actually see what is the impact. So for example, I'll spend to St. Albans because it's not far from where I live, but there's places out there like that you could use. We could help you find a bunch of places where that's already occurring, where there are flourishing private businesses and there are full-day pre-K programs for 4-year-olds. And then the last thing, I don't need to reiterate it. Again, anything you can do to help so that 4-year-olds in schools that are being provided. Other than that, we're willing to work on this. Probably be Eric McLaughlin will be our designee, who's really strong early childhood. Subject to questions, that's all I know about.
Questions or comments?
Can you say that last part again about having some folks from the General Assembly? I just want to make sure. I got
In
that.
Morgan's testimony, that I just read quickly a few minutes ago,
Yeah.
they talk about having a couple members of the General Assembly on the committee, the study planning committee. And I was thinking if you decide you want to do that, it might be really good to have somebody who actually is in a area where they've got both of those systems in play right now. And there's plenty of those, but there are other places, like I mentioned, Winooski doesn't have a private provider, they only have full pre-K.
We decided not to put.
Yeah, we had that conversation yesterday a little
I
bit.
didn't
Yeah,
hear that.
no, we're at 8 on the committee.
Yeah.
If this committee wants to move forward with additional people, certainly we'll entertain or respect anything.
I did mention that was Morgan's testimony, not mine.
Right, right.
Yeah.
We'll hear a little bit about
Yeah, yeah.
But if you did that, we think that'd be a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
And I think a lot of, we've certainly narrowed it, that's for sure.
We still think 4 months is the dream. but People don't meet in July. They don't meet together, 4 meetings will be tough, but
Gonna be a lot of work, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, for sure. And we may get a report that frankly is inadequate, and
or request for more time.
or adequate for steps or something. Like this is warrants some kinds of conversation over the summer to get the ball going.
Agreed.
I think we're hoping a lot of this data already exists
I gotta believe a lot of it does.
and that maybe it's just a matter of bringing it together and putting something forward. Yeah.
I'm a half guy, what is it, glass half full, totally. Yeah, so I am really, really feeling like this is gonna be great.
We hope so.
Am I on camera?
Sorry from my back to you, Senator. I forgot you were up there as well.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Nichols?
Good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Crossman. Dr. Crossman, you were in this committee last year. I don't know. We don't know an awful lot about building bright futures, to be honest. But we don't also have, as much as we'd love to have a walkthrough of it, we also are, this is sort of crunch mode for us. But we're happy to have you here with us.
I'm happy to be here. For the record, Dr. Morgan Crossman, I'm the Executive Director of Building Bright Futures, which is Vermont's Early Childhood State Advisory Council. I can send you a separate overview of BBF, but what I will say is that I actually, the last time we were providing testimony on universal pre-K was March 13th, 2020, right before the shutdown. We were having a very similar conversation with
Wow.
a joint committee
Okay.
of House Human Services and House Education.
Oh,
So
interesting. Okay.
there has been a ton of work done.
That predates my time on this committee. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yes. So the brief overview of Building Bright Futures.
No,
is
I
that-
was on this committee. That was definitely thank you for the record.
So it is that we are named in state and federal statute as Vermont's Early Childhood State Advisory Council, which means we serve as your primary advisor alongside us, the primary advisor to the governor and the administration on the well-being of kids and families prenatal to age 8. And we, to be clear for the record, we don't directly support or oppose any specific proposal or bill that comes through the legislature. Our job is to provide you resources and data you need to inform decision-making and to convene and elevate the voices of the field, monitor the system of services, and again, really be thinking about what data informs decision-making. We are a nonpartisan, data-driven entity. So I heard questions yesterday, are we independent? What does that mean? People often refer to BBF as an independent or quasi-governmental or neutral entity. And it's because our board, our formal board, is including representatives from all of the different departments, agencies, and divisions that serve kids and families in state government. It includes a member of the House and the Senate from the legislature. It includes a range of private early childhood experts and leaders across public and private programs. And we have a really robust 23 government-appointed board. So I'm going to stop talking about BDF and talk a little bit more about the scope of work and the roles that are identified in the study committee. I think your committee's done an incredible job summarizing and synthesizing and hopefully kind of really shortening the list. And what I want to outline is that what I'm seeing in the current draft is that there are really 3 scopes of work that are happening. One is that compilation of data that Senator Bullock mentioned, right? That the thing that needs to happen, because we don't have an integrated data system in Vermont, is that BDF alongside the Agency of Education and the Child Development Division will need to compile all of this information. That needs to start now. It's not actually something that we would be able to start in the summer to then bring to the committee. In our guidance, that work has to happen before we start convening a study committee to really understand the current context. We've initiated some of that work. It has started to be compiled. And I think there are a couple of pieces that are important to note there. We can compile the available data in this time frame, but our entities can't collect new data in this time frame, right? So we can hand over and compile and summarize everything that's in existence. But what we won't have the capacity to do is answer questions that we don't already have the data for by the deadlines. And I think that even more important is that by the time the final report is due, you will likely have, here's what data is available and here are the gaps and limitations to what we can't answer. And if this is what can inform recommendations.
And that's actually, I mean, I don't, that's not the worst thing. I mean, for us to get, to understand what those gaps are and the data that we, might have at that point. Okay.
Right. So my sense is that we would need to start before the bill lands.
Yeah.
To be able to
Thank you
say,
for your willingness to do that. Yeah,
yes, and we're willing to compile and work with the agencies to do that work.
thank you. Yes, Senator Gulick.
Did you see a lot of points in the bill where you thought to yourself, we don't have that data, or were you looking at it feeling pretty confident that actually you do have a lot of that data?
Great question. So I haven't done the crosswalk between the new language,
Okay,
the 4.1, and what was posted in the last 2 days. I think that there is a lot of data that is available. And I do think that there's some data where we might have to say, we don't have Vermont data. Here's what we know about the national, like studies that have been done in Oklahoma or Tennessee. So we can, I think that that's what you're likely to see at the end of this. Here's the Vermont data, right? And then here's what we know nationally, either about the best practice or studies that have been done elsewhere that are either comparable or not to Vermont's circumstances. And that's what you should expect to see, is the compilation of that data by the time a study is convened,
okay.
right?
Yeah, and Dr. Crossman, would it be possible for, so this leaves our committee today, it's gonna be attached to S56, but early next week, if we continue to look at this issue, if anything pops up, would you be willing to sort of partner with us, come back with, just sort of let, like Senator Gulick's question, you know, what do we know, what do we really not know, just to set up some expectations, we can then maybe amend if need be as it makes its way through the process.
Yes,
Okay, that'd
absolutely.
be great, thank you.
Yes, and we did start that Excel file, right? Here are the topics you're
Great.
asking, here are the questions you're asking, here's what we know exists, here are the questions that we have.
Thank you so much.
So we'll work through that with the agencies. The second piece is around convening the study, recognizing that you have asked the Agency of Education with this. I know you heard from them yesterday about their capacity. And our recommendation is that because both AOE and CBD play a role in overseeing and administering universal pre-K, that a neutral third-party convener would be better fit to bring those partners together alongside the rest of the committee to do that crosswalk and examination of data, and then really working to make recommendations for the program. And then BDF is well positioned to convene and staff that committee if that's the direction we choose to go.
We were in agreement with that, and then we were told that you all don't have
Attorney,
counsel.
legal
Yeah, you-
support, things that that this committee would need to really give the, sorry to interrupt,
No, you're.
that
thank you for
robust
completing my thought.
response.
So we have submitted several full reports that meet the definition of what you're looking for here. And I don't disagree with you on the formal legal counsel to craft study language. That is the piece of the scope of work that BDF as an entity would not do. But
Right.
because we would be convening these groups, AOE, CDD do have legal counsel and could take the recommendations of this committee and then be the ones that are drafting the language. I, for the record, would not want to be in the business at Building Right Futures of crafting the language. That's not our role. But supporting a committee to move forward with formal recommendations for how to move the work forward based on data is something that we have a ton of expertise in related to facilitation and convening.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that the committee discussed quite a bit, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that because that sort of legal expertise lies within the agency, it's one of the reasons I think people felt like they should kind of chair it, but I could be
That's what I heard.
wrong.
So for your consideration.
Yeah, thank you, thank you.
And what I would say is, and I think this is already reflected in the current draft, that if we are not convening that study, that we have a formal seat on
Yes, yes.
on that committee. A couple of other considerations related to the timing.
And you are,
scope.
just so you know.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that, and I think you heard this from Jay a couple minutes ago and from the agencies yesterday, the timeline is really challenging.
Yeah, we
So-
defer that.
Let me give you a very quick overview of what the potential timeline would be to do this well. We, BDF, AOE, and CDD start in the next few weeks compiling data for this committee. And we do that by August. August is the very first month that is realistic that this committee would be able to convene by end capacity.
Yeah.
Right? If it's a monthly meeting, you're talking about meeting 4 to 6 times max. And I think it feels important for me to note that as much as you've seen in testimony over the last couple of months, there's not a unified vision for pre-K policy and how to move it forward in the state.
Yeah.
So I'm just thinking about the fact that it's likely unrealistic to expect this group who has such passion for this body of work to be able to come together and have full agreement after 4 meetings on the vision of pre-K. And ultimately, it will be the responsibility of you all as the legislators to say, okay, and here's how we're going to move this based on what we know. And that's not a reason not to do it. I just wanted to name that
No,
for
I
you.
appreciate that. And we have, this is one of the things that's been in our minds since the start, and
Yeah.
completely respect and grateful for you, just bringing that up again. And I think we recognize if we're going to move forward with pre-K, we do need some data. We need some information. The legislature needs to be informed. And I think eyes wide open going into this, setting some very high expectations, and continue to track and work with all of you and see what we get. I mean, we're in that, just put, we're in that kind of tricky position. We need info, we want info to move forward, and this at least gets the ball rolling. And we may come back, frankly, and say, this isn't enough. We reinstitute a study, additional work, seeing, but I
Right, yeah.
I think we're gonna get a lot.
You've done tremendous work to get it to this point, and that's why I said, I'm not saying don't do it.
Oh, no, I understand, yeah.
I just want you to
We
have
usually
realistic
stop testimony after compliments, but we'll keep going. Please.
I just, ultimately, I think it's gonna be our decision to make, and we're gonna have to make some hard decisions, looking at the data and looking at what you come up with. And if you all don't end up agreeing, that's just the way it is, because there are, in my mind, multiple right answers here. Sorry, but I just have to state that there are a lot of ways of educating kids. So I just want to put that out there. We will make the decision in the end, and it probably won't be easy, but that's what we're gonna do. That's why we're here. And we get,
$12,000 a year.
right? Yeah, that's why we're here, to do this work, so.
Thank you.
I think I heard what she said.
Yeah.
We really don't, we need almost a strategic plan to pull this off, because we need to have some decision points, support matrix, and, if we don't get this data, where are we gonna go? We're gonna stop because we don't get the funding, or we're gonna stop because, one entity doesn't agree with it.
Right.
And that plan has to be done within this committee.
No, I think you raise a good point. What we will end up getting is, because remember, all of this is the precursor to whether or not we would move forward, or how we would move forward with pre-K going forward next year when we're all here. And don't try to leave. And that's the information in part that Dr. Cross will be providing us. And there'll be some disagreements as we read through that. There'll be some parts that are disjointed. There are going to be some holes, and we're just, Senator Phillips said, going to take that information and try to make some good decisions when we get back. Yeah, please.
One more thing to Mr. Nichols' point. I thought we had agreed that we were gonna do the weighting of for pre-K for a full.
Yeah, we did. I just don't think this is a big
I
deal.
don't think it can.
No, and so it's a finance
Right.
decision. So this committee,
Because right now it's what, 0.43 or something?
0.46, we sort of got it around. Yeah, it seems to make sense. Yeah, and so after crossover, we'll have that conversation, and then we'll send a recommendation down to finance and see if they're willing to do that.
Will the recommendation be in the form of the bill?
Generally, it could go one or two ways. We probably should do it as a bill. Yeah. And then what they would do is take it and put it into their miscellaneous tax bill. One way to do it. Kind of actually call it more of an amendment. / letter / bill.
Couple more points for
Okay.
you all. So related to the bill language, just making sure that you're very clearly articulating what information you all need to see in a final report back.
Yeah. That's feeling good, frankly,
Okay.
after
And-
multiple conversations. Yeah.
And that draft might be in 4.1, and just being clear about, again, decision-making authority. This
Yeah.
information's coming back to you all
That's right.
to make those decisions. And so I outlined that there were 3 parts of the scope of work. The first is the data compilation, which again, I feel like you can manage really well with the agency, the convening of the study committee and just being realistic about what is possible in 4 to 6 meetings. The third is cost. All of that language, I think, is still in 4.1 around estimating the cost. What will it cost to move in X, Y, or Z different directions? And so I think that feels like slightly different of a scope, or that it needs a separate entity to estimate that cost, right? So once we have all the data compiled, we will bring it to that committee, but then there still needs to be estimates provided for what the cost associated with those things are. That is definitely not the role of Building Great Futures. So I would say you need to establish which entity would be responsible.
Yeah, well, I know joint fiscal doesn't usually take this stuff on. We had them in a little bit, and that this isn't something, so really it would be the agency that we would be looking to come back with some estimates and have them pull on their various resources. But yeah.
And the last piece is around the study membership. So I think the committee's done a great job of trying to keep it a tight community of partners that is coming together to have this conversation. Our recommendations were to include multiple more, so apologies already, but to have a pre-K coordinator to be a part of the study committee, someone who's actively working with the different pre-K programs as it stands right now. At least 2 family representatives who have a varied experience with universal pre-K in the state. And then, as Jay mentioned earlier, a member of the Senate and a member of the House. One of the things that we found in moving forward with studies and reports and task forces is it's really helpful to have a legislative liaison who can then come back to the committee and say, yes, I was involved in every step of this process. I understood it. Here's where we landed, and can provide that that expertise to the committee as you're trying to move this body of work forward.
Yes, my concern about this, I don't want us, it seems, and again, this is new to me, this topic, there's so many passionate and committed people out there on this, and I almost want the legislature to sort of take a step back and see what sort of brought to us, but that's,
All for your consideration.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that concludes what I had for you today, and I'm happy again, as you're moving forward with study language and whatever
Yeah.
data and support you need, I can share matrix that we built and talk with us.
And I think, Dr. Cross, first of all, thanks for all of this. This is incredible. And as you know, even though we're advancing something today, we would like to have you back next week to see if there are areas that we could revise as it makes its way through the process. And of course, that process involves our friends on the in the House. Great. Yes, thanks.
I'm trying to remember, you did speak to us in health and welfare earlier this year, right? Can you
Yes.
remind me what, was that on the pre-K bill?
It was on S56, and I'm happy to provide that information to the committee as well. One of the things that we did when we saw the first draft of S56 come out is do a rapid information gathering strategy with stakeholders across the state, and then compiled all of that data, which provided stakeholder reflections on the current status of S56. And then we held a formal discussion at the State Advisory Council meeting and used that information to bring to the committee as well. So it was really about our role and really being that kind of data-driven entity and saying to you all, think of us in some ways as joint fiscal, right? They are here to provide that sort of fiscal capacity for you all. As you think about early childhood data, that is where we can play a significant role for you all. What data is available? How do we think about that data?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Yeah, please.
Agency of Education. I just wanted to flag with the administration, share some of the concerns that Dr. Crossman raised. I'm not prepared to speak on them at this moment, but
Yeah.
if you'll have us, we'd be happy to come back in at some point, maybe in tandem with Dr.
Yeah, that would be
Crossman.
great. Maybe this week, or maybe early next week.
Yeah,
That'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Committee, I know we have some deadlines to meet here. We've got one more thing to talk about, and that's driver's education. We're gonna do driver's education for a few minutes and then hopefully get 2 clean copies and advance things. Driver's education, are you on?
Joe is on.
Good afternoon, and thank you.
Hey Joe, how are you?
I am good. Hopefully my video, oh good, my video is coming through. Wonderful day. It's been challenging to say the least with the weather. I wish I could be there in person. Yes, I am here to hopefully answer questions for you. I just looked at the bill this morning. It has gone through quite a few changes. I think what we have is a great opportunity to maybe create a new model that might work. I brought this forward to our leadership, the past president, president-elect, and one of our program managers at ATSIA, and they said it was intriguing and interesting. They did offer a couple of avenues for assistance. I'll go into those a little bit later, but they did thought it had a little bit of merit. It is vastly different than what I saw back on March 3rd, though. In it, I noticed there was some collaboration between AOE, transportation, and driver education. I see that's been removed, but I think the opportunity to come up and create something high quality, meeting some needs, that is something to explore.
Yeah. So Joe, let me, because I know you're just zooming in, we recognize that this language might not be ideal at this point. What we're trying to do is move this today, and then we have committed to continuing the conversation as it makes its way through the process and either add additional language in the House Miscellaneous Education Bill or amend this section as it makes its way through the process. So that to say, I think we're kind of having a soft landing in a pretty good spot right now. And given Ledge Council's commitments, this committee's commitments and deadlines, I think what we're going to continue to do, if it works for you, is continue to work with you over the next couple of days to see if maybe we add something, an amendment on the floor or in a probes or finance, or possibly do something in miscellaneous education.
Okay, on that note, I do have one concern, and that would be the suspension for only allowing students to have 1 hour of driving lessons per day, which is a national standard. It's in the NDTIS, the national standards that we go by, because that opens up some questionable practices that are not educationally sound.
So we're editing on the fly here a little bit. I see Ted Fisher here. Mr. Fisher, would you mind identifying yourself and responding, since this is an agency proposal?
The record, Ted Fisher, Vermont Agency of Education. I'm the agency's Director of Communications and Legislative Affairs. The agency is requesting that this rule, which requires 1 hour per day per student of instruction, be waived to give us flexibility to structure the pilot program in such a way that is going to be most efficient and cost effective to do on a regional basis. It does not mean that we will do this. We also don't and disagree with Mr. Barch in terms of whether or not there's a pedagogical basis to this rule. I, of course, defer to his experience as an educator. I myself am not a driver educator, nor am I a licensed educator. However, we will not be engaging in such practices should it be needed, but we would prefer to have the legislature in creating the program waive the rule with your, excuse my casual language, your more powerful and august power than the board's power in needing to seek a waiver from the state board of this rule as part of staffing up the program. It just seems more efficient to us to do it at this point. We have it available if we need it, with the goal of perhaps having students potentially, do their in-car driver education over the course of a weekend or over the course of a week, rather than having to shuttle to a regional location that might be inconvenient to their families over the course of possibly as long as 6 weeks, which is what tends to happen now in terms of driver education, or drag out the process over an entire week to get the 6 hours spent car. So that is the reason behind the request.
Senator Giller.
Yes, Mr. Fisher, can you tell me when this rule was enacted? Do you know?
I do not know. You'll note that it references the department, so it's at least, I would say, about 10 years old. I did try to find out when and was not able to get an answer for what that is.
I'm only asking because I know when I took driver's ed, we didn't have that rule. So we used to drive for three hours at a time. So, and I'm not saying, I'm not a proponent necessarily, I'm just saying that rule must be relatively ish.
So just to clarify this rule, because I'm still a little confused by it, what we would need, right now, the rule says that in order to take driver's ed or be approved, you have to have at least an hour. Is that what it's saying? No.
No, it's what it says is what the rule means is, and Joe, if I'm getting any of the details wrong, please. Sorry, the clock is now buzzing. I apologize. If I'm getting any of the details wrong, please correct me. Essentially, it allows for 1 hour of behind the wheel instruction for the student. So what that implies is, regardless of how the driver education is structured, you're talking about 6 days of driving instruction.
1 hour at a time.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, this is helpful. I'm okay with taking this rule so that this can move forward. Joe, we can continue to have a conversation, but yeah, please, Senator Giller.
Well, I guess I want to hear more about the safety implications.
Yes, I'd love to clarify and talk to that point. Basically, what we do with the national standards and what we've developed in Vermont as leading some of those standards is that to have concurrent instruction where students would learn particular materials during the class and immediately after go practice those up to about an hour. And in most schools right now, we take 2, maybe 3 students out for a drive and return by the end of the class period. So they're maybe out for 90 minutes at the most, but it's taking the information that they've seen in the class, applying it as soon as they can practically in the car, and spreading that over 9 to 18 weeks, which allows for them to go home, practice those skills, come back, be reassessed, and then move on to the next lesson. So it's rather than jam-packing everything all at one session, it's better retention, it develops better habits, and safer outcome.
I mean, I could go either way. We could always pull this rule and keep taking testimony and still keep jumping into this a little bit, but I want to do some little advancement of driver's ed stuff. The other thing is, Joe, we pull the whole section and we forget it. And we're just trying to figure out which direction to go in. We're, as you know, at the 11th hour.
Yeah, I mean.
Absolutely, I understand crossover.
Go ahead, Joe. Sorry.
That's okay. No, I understand the situation and want to move something forward here. It might be, if I might make a recommendation, that that might be the amendment that you make afterwards, after you take more testimony in the House. But either we could bring in more traffic safety experts. I can bring in the national experts that I work with for you to get more information. But I would if we could strike that and if need be, add it in at the House level. But I think you need more information before you move forward on that one particular issue.
Well, the other option is we strike it right now. We hear from safety folks early next week, Tuesday, and then we can always add it back in as an amendment in Senate Appropriations.
If that works for the committee, I would certainly try and line up some testimony from Brett Robinson, who is the Chief Executive Officer of ATSIA, along with some, maybe 1 or 2 other experts. I wouldn't add much more than that. But basically all of these standards, national standards, were brought together by experts from across the country. We just had a state assessment regarding that. Newest standards is coming out, but that standard's been about 10 years now nationally, and we've just been assessed on it. But I would be open to trying to set that up so you could have more expert testimony on Tuesday.
I understand the national standards and I'm thankful that we have those for sure. It seems as though we're trying to deal with an extraordinary circumstance situation by, loosening some things so that we can move forward with the thinking that eventually we'll go back to, in a few years, we'll go back to following the standards. This would just be a temporary measure to try to alleviate some of the harm that's being done. And, I don't know if we can hear from Mr. Nichols, but.
Yes, Mr. Fisher.
Mr. Chair, through you, I prepared written testimony in response to the committee's concerns yesterday. That is not just on the pilot program language, which the AOE, on behalf of the administration, greatly appreciates. I would be happy to deliver that testimony if you'd like me to take the chair and also speak more to the reason why we're asking for this at this moment, if that would be helpful.
Sure. We're sticking to pre-K. We're sticking to driver's ed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Come on up.
Well,
Now that's
don't do that to me, Senator. Don't do that to me. Time was short. Again, for the record, Ted Fisher, Vermont Agency of Education. And Hayden is fantastic at his job. So he already has printed copies. I printed some in the hopes that I would be forgiven by him for getting it to him so late, but he has them. I also brought a single copy of our original testimony, which is actually me delivering on behalf of Secretary French, just in case folks have questions about sort of how we got here. So my goal today is to respond to some of the questions we had yesterday. I'm going to sort of summarize my written testimony. This is in response to the sort of overall overview of the challenges facing Vermont's school-based driver education system. Hopefully we can clarify some of the issues at play. I know yesterday we talked about some of the workforce challenges and their development challenges there. Many of the areas of effort that I'm going to outline are for now in the view of the administration best undertaken outside of the legislative venue. Quoting Secretary French here, we have a people problem, a pipeline problem, and it's this people problem, most specifically the lack of certified driver educators. And some reasons in Vermont that led us to propose the pilot program, and I want to thank Senator Dulick for her note a moment ago, that this is in fact an extraordinary measure. And in the ideal universe, we're going to have enough drivers, driver educators to be able to offer these programs in school in a way that works. So the first of three issues is the educator development pipeline. One of the factors driving the lack of driver educators is challenges with available educator preparation programs. There's no current active program in Vermont. We understand that a program that was available in New Hampshire is no longer operating. And there are some minor differences in licensing requirements between TMV and AOE. So we're working to address those issues. We're looking into the licensing aspect to see if we can better align them, make it easier for educators to enter the field. And we're additionally working with stakeholders in an attempt to bring a driver educator preparation program back to Vermont to essentially make it more convenient and easier for folks to take the coursework. Neither of these efforts is easily legislated at this point, nor will additional legislative language assist us in these efforts. We'd be happy to provide additional detail on our efforts and pledge to keep the committee appraised should we identify help for necessary legislative changes. Just by the way, I wrote this in response to draft 5.1. I have reviewed drafts 6.1 and 6.2, and I note the report back provision. You've heard me quote about generally our aversion to doing more reports, but we can certainly provide you an update. Come and give you both an update on the program planning next year, as well as on those educational reports. So that is our commitment to you. There also may be some potential additional or alternative approaches to facilitate individuals with expertise in driving or driver training, attaining driver educator license and joining the workforce. We've heard some of these approaches referred to as train the trainer, and there's some other programs we've heard about. An existing barrier to these approaches is our current licensing and educator development process, both at AOE and at DMD. And we require 6 training courses, which I mentioned yesterday. And I, in the end, decided not to put the list on the back page of the testimony. I was considering doing that, but we'd be happy to provide you a list of those. And I'm sure, I think Mr. Barch has also provided some exhibits that may be of interest to the committee that are similar to that. What's not yet clear about these kind of approaches is to what extent the requirements should be changed, with the understanding that we want Vermont driver educators to be well trained and able to safely deliver high quality driver education to Vermont students. We do want to make sure we continue to have high quality preparation programs. And then we're also not sure to what extent there's a great group of people who would be able to jump into and are willing to jump into the field if we were able to make the process easier. That said, I just talked to you about how we're looking at streamlining the licensing requirements and some of those other things. We expect to know more about this particular item as part of that process, and again, update you as part of the reporting process that we are planning to do and you guys have outlined in 6.2. The last one I want to talk about is the impact of the driver educator shortage on the students. Understanding the need to bring more professionals into the profession. We have a shortage program now, and we'd like to try to address it as early as the summer of next year by creating this pilot program. It is a pilot. The goal is to see if this works, see if it's something we can scale statewide, see if it alleviates the shortages and is useful to school districts. It may not be workable. I just want to note that, as noted previously, there are 2 aspects. There's the in-classroom element that we are working to address by exploring online learning opportunities or potential changes to licensing to allow folks who are not certified driver educators but are licensed educators to provide some in-classroom work. I want to just put a pin in that because I'm going to come back to it in a second in response to something Mr. Barch said a moment ago. With these efforts in progress, the remaining challenges of the pilot program. I did ask by the chair to provide some additional context bullets if you look at page 3 related to what we think. Again, this is a pilot, we're going to create it. We expect to give you the plan next January. But right now we're looking at providing a regional education clinics where students can get the 6 hours on the road instructions. They would, from multiple participating districts and schools, would participate in the regional clinics held over the weekend or summer. The location and those items are really still to be determined, and it's also going to be determined by which districts and schools are interested in participating and being part of it. One of the things we would like to consider is whether or not we can offer these clinics on a shorter time frame than would be allowed under that state board rule that I referenced earlier and is already in your draft language. Thinking about possibly doing this as short as a weekend, or maybe having a 1-week clinic where students get given the situation 2 hours behind the wheel or something like that. The rule prevents us from doing it. We have the ability, and the state board has the authority to issue a waiver of that rule. We can go and ask them if you don't want to act on it. But we thought it would be better, like I said, with you guys having the preemptive authority there for you to waive it for us. We're going to take this very carefully. You'll note the language here that we already looked over. I note and thank you to your counsel for including in 6.2. We have, if you look at, I believe, subsection B of that same language, we have a requirement to consult with driver educators and to work on something. We commit, and you will have the opportunity to verify next January that process will be undertaken in a consultative fashion and very carefully. We're not going to put students for 6 hours behind the wheel and exhaust them. But one of the things I wanted to know, and I put a pin in it a moment earlier, we may be saying, hey, students, you're going to get your 30 hours of classroom instruction in advance of going to this clinic. So the idea of understanding the rule, having important pedagogical reasons that may just not be workable with this program, we may need to make some sacrifices in that, in terms of it may mean that students spend a little bit of time in the pilot program, and I'm fully on a limb spitballing way outside of my subject matter area of expertise, so forgive me, but it's possible that you might need to you might have students who are in the classroom for a refresher on one of the modules they learned in their driver education coursework, say earlier in the month or earlier in the year, for a refresher, and then they go out to do the on-road, the practical. I'll just say, speaking as something outside of my AOE professional life, I'm going through a series of professional certifications right now that are very similar to this. We spend 2 hours in the classroom, we go out do 6 hours of practical. Next day, 2 hours of classroom, 6 hours of practical. there are ways to structure this that are workable. There are models that we can follow. We will certainly be working with our colleague drivers, educators, and reliant on them to deliver this. So I just want to note, I totally recognize the concerns, but unfortunately, we're not in an ideal situation. I think it's the view of the agency certainly, and of the, you know, in terms of the conversations we've had with our partners at TNV, of the administration, that we would prefer to be able to offer this in a way that allows students to get access to driver education that have no driver education at all.
We have heard from, and I appreciate Senator Gulick reminding us of this, that our transit and transportation committee would agree this is a big, big problem there. And so we need to start to address it.
I just talked very, very fast.
It was very good testimony.
Yeah, very
Yes,
good.
very good.
So I think we have a standard that we just don't have the people to execute that standard right now. I think, if we do something short of the professional standard of driver's education, that should be temporary. I mean, when I got my motorcycle additional identifier on my license, I got a 2-hour course, and then basically somebody threw me on a motorcycle and I was good to go. That wasn't ideal. I mean, there's guys that had 4 motorcycle accidents, okay? And I wish I'd had some professional one-on-one. It's not
This is not
possible.
supportive testimony.
That's right, don't lie.
Three, Mr. Chair, if I could briefly
No,
respond.
but I don't mean to cut you off. Please continue.
No, it's okay. No.
No.
I would just note you have 2 reporting requirements.
Yeah.
And again, my concern about legislative reports, but we have the opportunity, this is a pilot, we're gonna experiment, we'll be able to share our lessons learned, and you'll have an opportunity to consider those and consider any of those safety issues or potential necessary changes to the standards, again, to ensure the high quality and allow us to, if the decision's made to scale the program in the future.
So I guess what I was,
Yeah, please.
the final thing I was gonna say is that I don't have a problem taking that out of this bill. As long as we go back to
Taking
taking
which,
the driver's ed portion of it.
oh, well, so what we're thinking about doing, if the committee's okay with it, continuing at this, but also at the same time, we're getting a workforce development bill from the House and adding something to House Miscellaneous Ed, and continuing next week some of this testimony around the training piece and some of the others. So we may amend it. So I'm hoping we can move it and then recognize that we might need to amend but also continue to work on the topic. That was really helpful testimony.
I'll add by saying we really appreciate, we'll send by saying we really appreciate the committee including this. We would like to test this out and see if it works.
Any questions or comments from Mr. Fisher?
Mr. Barch, have any?
Mr. Barch, anything else from you?
Yes, if we were to proceed down the path as described by the Agency of Education, in the study, I would highly recommend and would like to see that we track the rate of crashes and tickets over time and compare that to what we have done in the past to the timeline after we implement these changes to see if there's a significant difference or not.
So you mean track, let's say there are 30 or 40 students that go through the pilot, track them themselves? Hey,
Yes.
listen, yeah, I'm happy to have that conversation and see if there's some way to add to that pilot next week. We could really start to figure that out and see. There are some legal issues around confidentiality, I suspect. There could be a bunch of things we'd have to pull apart, but
I'll just say, sorry, for the record, Mr. Chair, said again, I'll just say that I'm happy to say that that's not AOE state area for once.
Sure.
I think you should take testimony from the Department of Transportation.
And I'm going to talk to Senator Mazda. I know this is really important to them, that they want us to take some action, and I can talk with Senator Mazda and others down there and see if we can, if that's something that they would like to pursue a little bit, Joe.
Okay, that would be good. The other question I have, there is a guideline, it is important, is that not only does the student have the 6 hours of driving, but they also have to get 6 hours of observation. They get to learn from other drivers, other students learning. But the other issue comes down to liability for the instructor. Being alone in a vehicle with one student is not necessarily a comfortable or best practice either. And that has not been addressed in the bill.
So it's really 12 hours.
We aren't anticipating any additional changes to those requirements. So,
Okay.
So by definition, yes, in the interest of time,
Yeah.
yes, you're talking about students spending a significant amount of time in a car,
Yeah.
with other students. Yeah, the goal is to try to reduce the number of days that they will have to be doing this. We're talking about probably several days of 8-hour days on this. But again,
It's a pilot.
it's a
We're
pilot.
trying a few things
We need some
different.
flexibility to structure it and to talk directly, subject matter expert to subject matter expert with people like Mr. March. I love you guys, I really do. This is not, some of this stuff has to be figured out, and we have reporting requirements to come and let you know what we're planning. We need some flexibility to do that structured planning. Because I'm certainly not the right person to do this. I
Well,
have
and again,
very
this is
highly
not
competent
the end
colleagues.
of this conversation. Clearly, we're
Yes.
gonna keep working on driver's ed. We may amend this, we may, we're gonna work more on the workforce development. This is just the pilot that the administration wants to try. And again, we're hearing about the crisis, and our friends in transportation are deeply concerned. So we'll continue this conversation for sure.
I'm not aware, are we setting ourselves up for a lot of potential litigation because we're not following national standards, even in the context of a pilot program?
I think there's one lawyer. I see that.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a very good question.
Beth St. James, Office of Legislative Counsel. I don't know what those national standards are, so I can't speak to any liability.
6 hours of no more than 1 hour at a time, which we're waiving. For one thing.
Please.
I'm happy for us to chat and talk to our DMV colleagues. I'm also happy for them to be part of our planning considerations for the pilot.
If you would check with your DMV, what we will do right now is let's take a 5-minute break. We know that we've got people that have to leave at 4:25, so we've got some voting and other things to do. 10 minutes, can you check with your folks?
Unfortunately, I was hoping not to say this on the record, but as I mentioned to the chair earlier, unfortunately, this is the end of the time I have allotted to driver's ed prior to crossover. And I also believe you need to move the bill. If you're going to have additional conversations about this in the coming time, I'm happy to bring some of that information back. We would like to see this program move forward if possible. We can certainly answer that. You've given us reporting requirements to do that. And I think that's the appropriate venue for us to have those conversations, because I'm also hearing Mr. Barge say liability to driver educators, which is a little bit different than liability to the program. So maybe that's something that's best discussed as part of the planning process, but we can certainly provide you our best guess in the coming time. But I'm watching the clock, unfortunately. I won't be able to gather the appropriate people in time today, certainly. So we're looking at that timeline.
Ready? Reminder, I'm only 3 votes, everybody else needs a vote. So what do you want to do?
5 minutes.
Do a 5-minute recess.